So, My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 323 has officially released. You know what that means. I am going to dissect the differences between the official and unofficial translations while discussing whether or not a particular character may actually be traitor because of how suspicious they were in this chapter. And we'll talk about that right after this. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, here to talk to you about My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 323. So, when it comes to this chapter of My Hero Academia, there was a lot that I talked about in the actual review, and in this video, I'm going to tackle a few things that I wanted to tackle in that video, as well as go over a few differences in the chapter that do make a particular character seem very suspicious and seem to be the target of being the traitor of UA. With that out the way, let's get right into the differences between the official and unofficial translations for this chapter. To start off, there is a lot of differences between the official and unofficial translations when it comes to the beginning of the chapter. A lot of what is said in the official translation is a little bit different in the unofficial translations, and I would say that overall when it comes to the first few pages, it seems to be more clearly stated what Ida is saying, as well as what the UA barrier is supposed to be. It is stated a lot clearer in the official translations in comparison to the unofficial translation. For example, the first few lines of the first page of the unofficial translations implies that the Class 1A students have no idea or are trying to understand Midoriya's feelings for why he left UA. But in the official translations, they basically say that, they understand the concerns of Midoriya and how they still want to prove that everything in UA is safe for him to come back to. So that's a real difference between the official and unofficial translations, because in the unofficial translations, it is perceived to be that Class 1A has no idea why Deku is doing this, while in the official translations, it clearly states that they understand his feelings and they understand why he's doing all of this in the first place. And then we have another difference on this exact same page, and it comes from when Nezu is talking about how the students shouldn't allow their emotions to get ahead of them and how Deku is a valuable asset to them. We have Nezu, who brings up this idea that keeping Deku at UA and having him be the shelter is very risky. That is what is stated in the unofficial translation. But in the official translations, it's the complete opposite. They say that it would be risky if they put him somewhere else that isn't prepared and isn't a sustained facility. Which, you know what? That makes sense, because you wouldn't want your greatest asset in a place that could be easily destroyed and easily found. You would want it in the safest place on Earth, which at this moment is UA. So as I said, when it comes to the unofficial translations, when it comes to My Hero Academia this week, there are small differences in the translations that if you read it for the first time, it seems to contradict what is happening in the story, which is why you most likely should stick to the official translations, because they have a little bit more clarity, as well as it goes well with what the story is telling us when it comes to certain aspects of it. And now we get to another difference between the official and unofficial translations, and this comes in with how Nezu explains how the UA barrier works when it comes to travel and transportation and moving the civilians and the heroes to a safe place, because everything up until that moment is pretty much the same. Nezu says that UA's facility is just as heavily guarded as Tartarus, and Momo brings up that Shigaraki was able to break into Tartarus as well as UA even with those high defenses. And pretty much everything that is said after that is pretty much the same, even to the point where it's revealed that the UA barrier can also move/travel. But the difference comes with the description of the actual shafts that help with the transportation, because in the unofficial translations, it is described as a superconducting linear accelerator, which is shown right here. But in the official translations, it's described these pathways as being linear megalev networks, which are right here. And as you can see, it seems to be more accurate to call them the Maglex or the Maglev network, because they are very similar to like transit systems and how they're just on these like type of railing systems that send them away. While when it comes to the superconductive linear accelerator, it looks exactly nothing like what we see in the actual chapter. So the official translations for this has a better description of it, and it's more accurate than the unofficial translations. we go into once again, another difference, and this comes in after we have Nezu explaining how the transportation works, and he goes into describing how there are 3,000 plates that line in a sort of circular area that helps protect the railways that are transporting the civilians to safety. All of that is pretty much the same between the official and unofficial translations, even to the reference of Kaminari bringing up how it looks like a mecha anime. Which, you know, I'm just great that that is not something that is specific to our translations, and it's something that Horikoshi actually put in the My Hero Academia manga. But that aside, when it comes to the differences between the official and unofficial translation, it specifically comes to the explanation when it comes to Shiketsu and how they were able to reinforce their school in a similar vein to U.A after the incident between Kami and Toga. Because in the unofficial translation, they basically say that U.A was responsible for helping to build Shiketsu to be on the same level of U.A, and that Shiketsu is a secondary place for them to go if they ever evacuate U.A. But in the official translations, they say that after the incident with Toga as well as Kami, that Shiketsu was the one that reinforced their own school, as well as other schools followed their lead, meaning that U.A could go to either Shiketsu if something bad happens at U.A, or go to these other schools as points of evacuation. And from here, I think the official translations did it justice and translated this a little bit better, because it shows that Shiketsu as well as the other schools have their own agency, in reference to that they do their own thing and doesn't have to directly follow U.A. They once again bring up how Shiketsu is in the west and U.A is in the east. And the point that I bring up is that it shows that Shiketsu doesn't have to rely on U.A, and that the reasoning why it is considered one of the rival schools is because they're able to compete with U.A. U.A has the higher prestige, but Shiketsu still raises great heroes, so it just makes sense that they would do this on their own and not necessarily need the help of U.A, showing that U.A may be the best hero school, but it's not the only one reacting to this entire situation and doing their best to help. So yeah, we go from there to another difference within the chapter, and this one is a tiny difference. The difference is that when it comes to the official translations, you have Kaminari after Nezu has says, "Oh, I paid for the U.A barrier all by myself." He brings up how it would cost 100 millions of yen, when in contrast in the official translations he says 1 billion yen. Now when it comes to that, like 100 million yen, 1 billion yen, the difference between those is not that significant. And the reason why that money is brought up when it comes to how much it cost is just to show how much and how he played a major role in the contributions to quirk morality education and how he's well known worldwide. That was just to put emphasis on that, and I'll get back to that point in a second. But there was also someone who was well known in the field of quirks that ended up being a bad guy. So yeah, after that small difference, we pretty much go from the flashback. Everything else is pretty much the same from there on. What the people said are technically different, but the same meaning is being conveyed. The difference between the official and unofficial translations come from a small difference that we finally get the translation of what is on the phone. It is what we predicted. It's a lot about propaganda and people not knowing what all for one and one for all is. Best Gina's speech is pretty much the same between the official and unofficial translations. He talks about how the plan was to use Deku as bait and how unfortunately it didn't go out the way that they wanted. So they're wanting Deku to stay at UA and at least rest there so that he can be healed up because he's a great asset. So when it comes to one of the next differences between the official and unofficial translation, it comes from what this one civilian says. And when it comes to what this one civilian says, it has more to do with clarity and probably a mistranslation in the unofficial translations that was fixed in the official translations. Because you have this one individual in the unofficial translations talking about how Japan is a lawless state and how the heroes have failed and failed again, and how he says that we're telling you to accept the burden of it, which doesn't make sense within the context of the situation if they are chastising the heroes. But this is fixed in the official translation by having him saying that you're telling us to take on the burden of your mistakes, which makes sense than the civilians telling the heroes to accept the burden of all of it. because they're already accepting the burden of all of it. It just makes sense for the civilian to make reference to the civilians taking on the burden that belongs to the heroes. So once again, this just shows that, the unofficial translations can really make bad errors that can really shift the understanding and the translation of the chapter. And with that difference in mind, we get to the final difference between the official and unofficial translations, where we cut to the end of Uraraka's speech, because pretty much through the official and unofficial translations, Uraraka's speech is pretty much the same. She basically says that Deku has this power, but the power doesn't make him special. She talks about how All for One was going to be defeated and how One for All was made to defeat All for One. She pretty much tells them to look at Deku because he left UA to protect them, and looking at the state that he's in, as well as what the Weasel Girl says is pretty much the same between the official and unofficial translations. And now the final difference between the official and unofficial translation comes in when Nezu is monologuing inside of his head as he's looking at Uraraka. Because in the unofficial translation, Nezu thinks about how the first step is always hard, and how the person that takes that first step will lead to the birth of a true hero that will surpass All Might, which is very interesting because he says this because he's thinking this as he's looking at Uraraka, implying that Uraraka may be a hero that can surpass All Might. But that is not the case in the official translation, because the official translation has Nezu thinking about how it's impossible for people to take this first step, but that the first person that takes that step will carve the way to someone else to become the ultimate hero that will surpass Yaki, to surpass All Might. Which is very different and puts what he's saying and what he's thinking while looking at Uraraka be put into a different context. Because he's not saying that Uraraka will be the one to be the greatest hero or to be a great hero to surpass All Might, but that she's paving the way for someone to be a greater hero than All Might. Which is more impactful because that ties into the idea of what My Hero Academia is about. It's about how the old way of hero society is flawed with its over-reliance on one singular hero, but that it needs to rely on heroes as a whole to keep society up. And what is the best way to show that you can rely on multiple heroes to keep society afloat is by having one hero take the initiative and not strive for greatness, but to create a path for everyone else to follow. And based off that idea, Uraraka is going to be the one to carve that path. And we have to remember that this is the story about how Deku becomes the greatest hero. And for that story to occur, he needs to follow a certain path. And for Deku to follow that certain path, Uraraka would be a crucial part of it, because she is going to be the one to help lead Deku down this path. And with that in mind, Uraraka may not be the only one to carve that path for Deku. She's the first one to take the step to carve it, but most likely I think the entirety of Class 1A is going to help carve the path for Deku so that he can become a greater hero than All Might. And by Deku becoming a greater hero than All Might with the help of other people, that will in turn be the sign to show that society can and is going to be held up by multiple people, even if they do have one great hero above all of them. The only way that he would have gotten there is with the help of others, meaning that all of the heroes in unison will be pushing one person forward while holding up society. So I think that that is what is coming from Nezu's inner dialogue when it comes to the end of this chapter. And talking about Nezu, many people may think that because of what Nezu said in this chapter, because in this chapter, the reasoning why he has the UA barrier to be so precise and so effective against Shigaraki is because he just had an intuition that something bad would happen with Shigaraki, and many people have taken this to mean that Nezu may be a traitor, and how he may be the UA traitor because of how specifically he created this barrier to defend against Shigaraki. To which my response would be, no, and here's why. Yes, Nezu was able to do all of this based off an intuition, based off his hunch, but here's the thing, we have to remember Nezu's ability, Nezu's quirk, is high specs, which for the most part just gives him an intelligence higher than pretty much any human on Earth. which is why a lot of the times when he brings up how humans can be very like impossible to work with and how they're impossible to take the first step, he's the one who's able to say that because his intelligence is higher than that, and he understands what people have to do to make a better society because of how intelligent he is. And because of that, you would think that because he's so intelligent, that his intuition may be a little bit more precise because of that intelligence. And when it even comes to that, it's just a basic thing to do. Shigaraki was the one that broke into UA the first time and was able to decay the metal barriers. So since Shigaraki was the first one to break into UA, it just makes sense to tailor your plan against the only person that was able to break through your defenses. And as we see later on, Shigaraki was also able to break through the defenses of Tartarus, which were also very similar to the defenses of UA. So even though Nezu had this intuition and it seems very suspect, the reasoning why he had this intuition and why he thought that this would be the best step forward and why he went all of this way is because he was overcompensating. He was being overprotective. He was being very skeptical, and through that skepticism, he put all of this in place, and it just so happened to be a very great counter to Shigaraki. So pretty much what I'm saying is that Nezu isn't the traitor because he came up with all of this to specifically counter Shigaraki, because all of this just came about by him just being very prepared. And also the fact that we're able to get an understanding of his inner workings and his inner dialogue, showing that he really does care about the students through that, it's very unlikely that Nezu is the UA traitor for how much he cares about UA, cares about the students, and cares about saving the civilians. Because if he didn't do that, then we wouldn't be getting his inner monologue at all, and it would just be left ambiguous, or we have no idea about what he's thinking. So yeah, I do not think that Nezu is the UA traitor. I think he just got extremely lucky because of his high intelligence. So yeah, that's actually all I really wanted to tackle with that, because I wanted to tackle more about what Ochako said at the end of the story and how she could be the greatest hero, or how she could be a great hero similar to Deku, and I think that is the case, but that was all based off the unofficial translations, which were not accurate, and that idea kind of fell flat, but I was still able to talk about that a little bit more. So with that, talking about Uraraka, I could make a few predictions on what I think is going to be going on in chapter 224. Most likely, we're going to get the civilians either all completely turned to the side of Deku and allowing him to stay here, or there's still going to be a little bit of dissension within the crowd, but I think that eventually Weasel Girl is going to speak up and say, hey, this kid is the one that saved me, he did all of this, I can vouch for her, which could turn the tides and convince everyone, or we'll get more of Uraraka's speech, and her speech itself will try to convince more people to allow Deku to stay here. And I can also see that we finally will get to see Midoriya finally meet up with his mother once again. They're going to have this loving embrace, and that could also be something that could convince the civilians there to allow Deku to stay here, if not for a long time, at least long enough for him to heal and rest. As well as we could potentially get the other Class 1A members come in and tell the civilians that, hey, we're the ones that did this, we believe in him, so please let him stay here. So all in all, what I think is going to most likely happen next chapter is that we may get a more continuation of Uraraka's speech, or we may get the interjections of other people within the civilians vouch for Deku, as well as seeing all of the civilians finally change sides and support Deku and allowing him to come and stay at UA at least for a little while. So yeah, that's all I really have to say in this discussion when it comes to Uraraka, Nezu, the differences between the official and unofficial translations, and kind of what I think is going to be going on next chapter. So yeah, that's all I really have to say. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed recording it. Leave your thoughts down below on what you thought of this chapter and what you think is going to be happening next chapter. Do you think that we're going to get more of Uraraka's speech? Do you think that we're going to get more of the Weasel Girl? Because I really, really hope so. Or do you think that Nezu is the traitor? I do not think so, but hey, leave your thoughts down in the comments down below, and leave a like on this video if you liked it. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like this type of content where I do My Hero Academia reviews, discussions, all of the works, as well as hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!